The soft buzz of fluorescent lights overhead barely masked the hum of servers echoing through the building. It was just past midnight when Olivia Bennett walked through the sliding glass doors of Bennett Enterprises' San Jose headquarters, not as a visionary leader of the company, but as an anonymous junior operations trainee named Liv Monroe. Her once-tailored suits were replaced with the gray uniform of a night shift support worker, and her signature curls were pulled back beneath a standard-issue cap. The receptionist barely glanced up. No one recognized her. That was the point. For the past few months, Olivia had felt the growing disconnect. The company was thriving, stock prices soaring, shareholders happy, but the pulse beneath it all had shifted. Whisper concerns had reached her ears. Night shift dissatisfaction, employees feeling unheard, managers enforcing productivity over people. Every email she received about company culture praised her leadership, but something felt wrong. Numbers did not show her the heart of the place she built. People did. So here she was, stripping away her power and slipping into anonymity to observe, not command. The operations manager on duty, Dana, gave her a clipboard and a quick rundown. "You're shadowing tonight, Liv. Mostly stocking, equipment checks, and a walkthrough at 2 o'clock in the morning. Easy stuff." Olivia nodded, letting her posture slump just enough to sell the part. She took her clipboard and joined the rotating crew. Warehouse assistants, IT runners, and janitors who worked through the night like invisible gears in a machine too big to notice them. She moved from room to room, eyes wide open. No one gave her a second glance. Conversations flowed around her, gripes about hours, laughter over vending machine snacks, quiet venting about upper management. They spoke freely in her presence, believing she was just another cog. By 2 o'clock in the morning, she was exhausted, not just from physical labor, but from what she had seen. People overworked and overlooked. A floor technician complained that a manager had cut breaks to boost overnight output. A systems runner shared how he hadn't seen a raise in 3 years. Small things, perhaps, but together they formed a mosaic of neglect. Olivia wandered into a quiet hallway near the back of the building, where foot traffic thinned and silence took over. It was there, past the janitorial supply room, that she noticed it, a soft, flickering light bleeding from under the door of the security office. She paused, her steps slowing. It was well past break time. Curiosity tugged at her as she moved closer, careful not to make noise. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, she saw something unexpected. A young man, maybe mid-20s, sat at the small desk with a thick textbook open in front of him. The main light was off. Instead, he used a small flashlight, its beam casting shadows across the pages. He leaned forward, underlining sentences, scribbling notes on a legal pad. His uniform was security standard, but his focus was anything but standard. She stayed frozen, not wanting to intrude. There was an intensity in the way he studied, not casual, not bored, but hungry, urgent. Every page turn was deliberate. Every note he took carried the weight of someone fighting for something just out of reach. Olivia felt something stir in her chest. She had come to investigate culture, to listen and observe, but this moment felt personal. It was like staring into a mirror of her own past. The late nights she had spent balancing textbooks and part-time work. The fear of falling short. The long road from struggling student to tech magnate. That same fire she saw in his eyes. She backed away slowly, careful not to be seen. The image seared into her mind. The rest of the shift passed like a blur. The newness of her disguise faded, replaced by a weight she hadn't anticipated. It was no longer about seeing what was broken. It was about understanding what and who had been left unseen. By 6 o'clock in the morning, she had returned the clipboard, thanked Dana with a tired smile, and stepped out into the soft light of dawn. The city yawned awake, and she slipped back into her real life like slipping into a familiar coat. But Olivia Bennett was no longer the same. That flashlight in the dark had shown her more than any quarterly report ever had. It had sparked something in her, a need to learn more about the young man behind the desk, and uncover how many more stories like his were hidden in the night. And for the first time in years, Olivia Bennett walked into her office later, that day not as the CEO at the top of the tower, but as someone determined to climb back down and truly see. The next evening, just before 10 o'clock, Olivia stepped out of her car once again, dressed in the same nondescript gray uniform. Her ID badge clipped to her pocket reading Liv Monroe. The summer air was thick with a hum of distant traffic, and the building stood as it always did, imposing, gleaming, indifferent. But Olivia walked toward it with a very different sense of purpose now. She had spent the entire day trying to work through her usual executive duties, only to find her thoughts drifting constantly back to the image of that young man in the security office. His quiet determination had shaken something loose in her. She had no name for him yet, but the clarity in his expression, the deliberate way he had studied in silence, had left an imprint that wouldn't let go. Tonight, she wasn't here just to observe. She was here to understand. Inside, the rhythm of the night crew resumed its quiet hum. Olivia went through the motions, checklists, floor walks, short check-ins with Dana, but her focus never strayed far from the security hallway. She was careful, methodical, making sure her presence didn't stand out, even as anticipation tugged at her thoughts. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, she finally made her way back to the corridor near the security office. The hallway was dim and cool, mostly in use at this hour. She moved slowly, her step soft, and once again saw the faint glow slipping from beneath the door. The door was closed this time, but a thin sliver of light still edged along the bottom. Olivia hesitated. She could have knocked, made up a reason to enter, but something in her warned against disrupting the scene again. She leaned against the wall just across from the door and waited, arms crossed, posture relaxed. After a few minutes, the door creaked open. The security guard stepped out, blinking against the change in light. Olivia straightened slightly. He looked about 25, tall and lean with close-cropped hair and a watchful expression. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes were tired. He glanced down the hall and saw her. "Hey," he said with a nod, not recognizing her from the previous night. "Hey," she returned, keeping her tone casual. "Long shift." He gave a dry chuckle. "They always are." He leaned against the opposite wall, stretching his back. "You knew?" "Second night," she replied, letting just enough truth slip into the lie. "Just try not to get lost." "Well, this hallway is a dead end, unless you like vending machine coffee," he said, jerking his thumb toward a break room at the far end. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. "I saw the light earlier. You were studying." His eyes flicked to hers, guarded now, just brushing up, trying to stay sharp. "For what?" she asked gently. There was a pause. Something in her voice must have made him lower his guard a little. "Finance," he said eventually. "I'm in school. Sort of. Nights, weekends, whatever I can manage. Studying for my final this week." She raised her eyebrows. "Ambitious." He shrugged. "Gotta be. This job pays the bills, but it's not forever." "I get that," Olivia said. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he said. "Marcus Reed." Olivia nodded, storing the name. "I'm Liv. Nice to meet you." He nodded back. "Nice to meet you too." They stood there for a moment, the quiet stretching comfortably. Olivia glanced down at his hand, still holding a folded textbook under one arm. "What are you reading?" He showed her the spine. "Intermediate financial accounting." She winced playfully. "Oof. Sounds intense." "You have no idea." They shared a small laugh. It felt honest. "I used to work nights too," Olivia offered. "Took a while to find a way out of them." Marcus glanced at her. "Yeah? What did you do?" She thought for a second. "Bit of everything. Waitressing, front desk at a gym, whatever paid enough to cover rent and classes." He smiled faintly. "Respect. You thinking corporate finance? Banking?" Honestly, Marcus said, scratching the back of his neck, "I'd love to work in financial planning. Strategy, maybe. Helping businesses grow. I've been looking at Bennett Enterprises for years. Their finance division is solid, real innovation in their model." Olivia tilted her head. "You follow companies that closely?" "I have to," he said. "I'm not just trying to get a job. I'm trying to build something. Long-term. Stability. Maybe a future where I don't have to work 2 jobs and study under a flashlight." There was again that same fire she had seen before. Not desperation. Determination. She nodded slowly. That's a solid goal. Marcus looked at her more closely now. What about you? What are you hoping to do? Olivia hesitated, the lie suddenly harder to maintain. Still figuring it out, she said. But I think I'm in the right place. Marcus gave a small laugh. Are we all? Another silence passed between them, this one thicker. Olivia wanted to ask a dozen more questions about his schedule, his classes, his plans. But something told her she had already learned what mattered most. He wasn't just another night shift worker. He was someone who carried a vision larger than his current reality. And he wasn't asking for a handout. He was building a ladder, one rung at a time. I should get back, he said, nodding toward his post. Of course, Olivia said, stepping aside. He gave her a parting nod. Nice talking to you, Liv. You too, Marcus. She watched him walk away, the textbook still tucked under his arm, the flashlight beam flicking back on as he disappeared into the small office once more. Olivia turned and walked back down the hall, her mind racing. This wasn't just about one man working hard. It was about the culture that didn't see him, the leadership that dismissed people like him, and the systems that allowed it. If she hadn't come in disguise, she never would have known he existed. And now that she did, she couldn't ignore him. She didn't know exactly what she would do yet, but she knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. Olivia sat in her office just before noon, the blinds drawn against the relentless California sun. Her desk, usually a sanctuary of clarity and focus, now felt like a barrier between who she had become and what she was beginning to see. The morning had been a blur of executive briefings, calendar meetings, and performance updates. She had nodded in the right places, asked the right questions, signed off on the quarterly targets, but none of it truly registered. Her mind was still in that hallway, standing under flickering ceiling lights, speaking to a man who didn't know who she was but had spoken with more clarity and vision than half the leaders in her company. Marcus Reed. She typed the name into the internal employee directory, fingers hesitating for only a moment before pressing enter. His profile loaded with a standard badge photo, security uniform, neutral expression, and a list of basic HR information. Hired 10 months ago, assigned to overnight building security, minimal internal notes. No flags, no commendations, no cross-departmental exposure. Just a name in the system, buried deep in the night shift. She clicked through the fields, scanning for something more personal. What she found made her sit up straighter. Under employee notes, a small notation read, working secondary employment, approved per contract clause B4. No conflicts noted. She opened a side tab and ran a quick check through the employee access system. Marcus had logged into the building consistently 5 nights a week, typically from 10 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning. But that wasn't the only data trail. A second ID, belonging to a part-time retail chain on the east side of the city, showed regular weekend scans tied to his registered home address. She leaned back in her chair. He was working security 5 nights a week and holding down retail shifts on weekends. That left barely any time for classes, let alone sleep. Olivia minimized the screens and stared at her reflection in the darkened monitor. For the first time in a long time, she remembered what it felt like to do homework on the subway, to answer customer calls with textbooks hidden beneath her desk, to watch her bank account drop below double digits, and wonder if the dream was worth the grind. It had taken her years to stop feeling like she was one missed payment away from failure. Even as CEO, the weight of that history still followed her, but she had buried it beneath layers of policy and delegation. Until now, she reopened the file and clicked into Marcus's emergency contact information. No parents listed, only a sister's name, followed by an out-of-state address. She wrote it down. Then at the bottom, a brief note, educational reimbursement, not enrolled in company program. She frowned. Her company had a tuition assistance initiative. It wasn't perfect, but it was there. Why hadn't he enrolled? She checked the criteria. Minimum 1 year of employment. Marcus had joined 10 months ago, 2 months short. The timing felt cruel. She pulled up a secondary interface, one not typically used by executives, and accessed the security logs. She scanned through weeks of footage, fast-forwarding through silent nights, watching Marcus's familiar figure making rounds, helping lost employees, covering short-staff zones. In nearly every instance, he was moving, active, present, engaged. But then, just after 1 o'clock in the morning, night after night, the pattern changed. For 30 minutes each time, the camera near the security office caught the faint light of his desk lamp and the quiet turn of textbook pages. She didn't see distraction. She saw discipline. At that moment, a knock on her office door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called, minimizing the tabs. It was Joanna, her executive assistant. "Your lunch meeting's been pushed." Legal sent over the updated vendor contract too. "Want me to bring it in?" "In a bit," Olivia said. "Actually, could you pull Marcus Reed's full HR record for me? I want the original application too, if it's still archived." Joanna raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. "Of course." As the door closed behind her, Olivia exhaled slowly. She needed to know more, not just about Marcus, but about how many others like him were moving unnoticed through her company's architecture. How many people were trying to climb ladders they couldn't even see? 20 minutes later, a digital folder pinged into her inbox. She opened it immediately. Marcus's application had been submitted just under a year ago. His resume was clean but modest. 2 years of community college, part-time job since high school, no formal degree yet. The cover letter was short, almost hesitant, but earnest. He'd written about needing steady income while finishing his studies, about being eager to work nights to keep his days open for school, about wanting to contribute to a company with future opportunity. There was no mention of ambition, no demand for advancement, just a quiet hope for stability. She kept reading. The reference section listed a former employer at a grocery chain who had noted his reliability and calm under pressure. The last line of the letter stuck with her. "I know I'm just starting out, but I'm willing to work hard for a chance." A chance. That was all he'd asked for. She sat back and felt the hollow ache that had been building since her night shift began to settle deeper. The structure she had built, a company praised for its vision, innovation, and market dominance, had somehow let stories like Marcus's fall between the cracks. Not from cruelty, from neglect, from scaling so fast, so far, that she could no longer see the people who had helped her climb. It wasn't just about Marcus. It was about who she had become in the process. She closed the file and turned her chair toward the window, pulling open the blinds. Sunlight flooded the room. Outside, the city pulsed with energy, unaware of the quiet revolution stirring inside its towering buildings. The next move wasn't clear yet, but Olivia knew this. Marcus Reed had earned more than invisibility. He had earned her attention, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something more. She picked up her phone and made a call to facilities. "I need a night shift schedule for the next 2 weeks," she said. "And don't make it public." "Any particular reason?" the manager on the other end asked. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm not done learning." The hum of the overhead lights felt less harsh now that Olivia knew what to expect. 3 more nights had passed since her quiet discovery of Marcus Reed, and each one had brought her deeper into a world she had once known, then slowly forgotten. She no longer floated through the hallways as a passive observer. She asked questions, helped with equipment loads, shared vending machine coffee during breaks, and learned names she had never read in an executive briefing. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had a plan. At precisely 1 o'clock in the morning, Olivia left her scheduled walkthrough early and made her way toward the break room adjacent to the security office. It was small and underutilized, a metal table, 2 chairs, and a rattling refrigerator in the corner. She sat at the table with a small thermos of coffee and 2 mismatched paper cups. It wasn't much, but it felt more honest than her usual boardroom gestures. The hallway remained quiet. A few footsteps echoed in the distance, but no one entered. Then, a few minutes later, Marcus appeared from around the corner, textbook tucked under one arm, a water bottle in the other. His uniform was the same, but his expression brightened slightly when he saw her. "Hey," he said, surprised. "Didn't think anyone used this place after midnight." "Wasn't sure either," she replied casually. but it's the only room that doesn't smell like printer ink or bleach. He laughed softly and stepped inside. You're not wrong. I brought extra coffee, she offered, gesturing to the thermos. Didn't know if you'd want any. Marcus hesitated for just a second, then pulled out the other chair. Sure, thanks. She poured a cup for him, then one for herself, and for a moment they both sipped in silence. It was the kind of pause that didn't need filling. You studying again tonight? She asked, nodding toward the textbook. Yeah, he said. Final project's due in 2 weeks. It's rough. What's it on? Comparative financial model between early-stage tech startups and mid-cap firms, he said, with a tired smile. Real edge-of-your-seat stuff. Olivia smiled back. Sounds like my kind of bedtime reading. He looked at her, amused. You serious? She shrugged. I like numbers. Always have. They're honest. Marcus nodded. Same here. I didn't grow up with a lot, so learning how money moves, how it works, it kind of became my way of making sense of everything. That's a good way to put it, she said. It's more than just profits and losses. It's about control, understanding, even survival sometimes. He glanced at her with surprise. You talk like you've done this before. She took a sip from her cup and smiled faintly. Maybe in another life. He looked thoughtful, then leaned back. I'm trying to transfer to finish my bachelor's. Community college was step one. Got my associate degree last spring. Now it's all night classes and online coursework. How do you stay awake? She asked, not teasing, but genuinely curious. Marcus shrugged. I don't always, but I've come this far. I can't stop now. I don't want to be stuck forever in jobs that don't see me. Olivia felt that sentence like a weight. He hadn't said it angrily, just plainly, as if it were a truth he carried in his bones. What do you want to do exactly? She asked. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I want to work in finance. Strategy, maybe, not just budgets. I like the idea of helping companies make smart decisions, creating something that lasts. I used to think I could do that at Bennett one day, but people laugh when I say that. She blinked. Why? Because I'm a security guard, he said simply. And I didn't go to Yale or Stanford. Because I work nights and come to meetings with ink on my hands. People see the uniform, and they assume that's all there is. She didn't answer right away. She was too busy memorizing every word. He looked at her, not unkindly. You're one of the few who actually talks to me like I matter. Most of the day, crew walk past like I'm part of the wall. She wanted to tell him who she was. To explain that the company he dreamed of working for was her creation, her burden, and her legacy. But something held her back. This moment wasn't about her. It was about trust. And breaking it now would destroy everything. Instead, she said, I think you're doing more than most people ever try. That counts. Marcus looked down at his cup. I hope so. I just want a chance. That's it. They sat in silence again, the hum of the vending machine, the only sound between them. Then Marcus stood and gathered his textbook. Thanks for the coffee, he said, with real gratitude in his voice. Anytime. He hesitated, then added, You know, I don't say this often, but talking to you, it helps. Makes it feel less lonely. Olivia nodded, her throat tight. Same. He gave her a small wave and disappeared into the hallway. She stayed in the room long after he was gone, the half-empty thermos cooling on the table. Her hands were still wrapped around the cup, but her thoughts had moved far beyond the break room. She wasn't just inspired by Marcus. She was haunted by him, by the invisible walls he faced, the ones she had unknowingly helped build. If a man like Marcus couldn't find a place at her company, then who had she built it for? She didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time in years, Olivia Bennett felt like she was beginning to ask the right questions. And that, perhaps, was the most important thing she had done in a very long time. It was nearly 4 o'clock in the morning when Olivia walked down the hallway adjacent to the security office, the night unusually quiet. The overhead lights flickered slightly as she passed beneath them, casting elongated shadows along the polished floor. Most of the crew had already taken their breaks and returned to their respective duties. Leaving the corridor still, blanketed in a hush that only the very late hours could offer. She had stayed longer tonight, finding small reasons to linger near the lower levels of the building. Her usual role had become second nature by now, a quiet, competent trainee who helped where needed and asked the kind of questions no one thought to report. Her presence was accepted, unnoticed, but beneath the surface, every moment had weight. Every observation added to her growing collection of silent revelations. When she reached the door of the break room again, she noticed it was ajar. A faint light glowed from within. She gently pushed it open, expecting perhaps to find Marcus finishing up his nightly reading. But the room was empty, save for the open textbook still resting on the table, pages held down by a coffee-stained paperweight. A half-finished cup of coffee sat beside it. Olivia looked around, unsure if he had just stepped out momentarily or had forgotten something. Her eyes landed on a folded piece of paper near the edge of the table. It was partially tucked in the corner of the textbook, as though left behind in haste. She hesitated. It wasn't hers, but something about the deliberate placement, almost like it was meant to be found, pulled her in. She picked it up carefully. The paper had been folded 3 times and creased sharply, its edges worn slightly, like it had been opened and read many times before. She unfolded it slowly. At the top, in Marcus's neat handwriting, were 2 words written in block letters: personal goals. Below that, a list: finish degree before 28. Help mom pay off her medical debt. Start emergency fund. Buy a car that isn't from the last century. Move into a real apartment. No more roommates. Get internship anywhere that pays. Learn how to cook more than rice and eggs. Work in finance long term. Make a difference for someone else. Work at Bennett Enterprises one day, maybe in finance. Olivia's eyes stopped there. The sentence was underlined twice. The ink was darker, as if the pen had pressed harder when writing it. The coincidence hit her like a blow to the chest. He didn't just want to work somewhere. He wanted to work at her company. The very building he now patrolled at night was the object of his ambition, a place he had once written down on paper as a dream. Maybe a far-off one, maybe a fragile one, but a dream nonetheless. Her fingers gripped the paper more tightly, the weight of it suddenly immense. This wasn't just about hope. This was about direction, commitment. Marcus had written down the name of her company, not knowing she was watching, not knowing the very person who could change everything was now holding the proof of his belief. She read the list again, this time slower. There was no arrogance in his tone, no entitlement, just a raw, honest vision for something better. Not wealth, not prestige, just enough to live with dignity, to build something real, to contribute. The line, make a difference for someone else, lingered in her mind longer than the rest. It didn't come with a condition. It wasn't tied to a promotion or a salary. It was simply there, a quiet aspiration buried among financial goals and survival strategies. She folded the paper again, gently this time, and slid it into the pocket of her uniform. She would return it later, of course. But right now, it felt like more than a note. It felt like a message, one not meant for anyone in particular, yet somehow directed at her all the same. She stepped out of the break room and made her way toward the operations hallway. The building remained still, and her footsteps were the only sound. As she walked, she thought about how many others might be walking around this very company with folded papers in their pockets. Unspoken ambitions, private dreams, handwritten hope. She reached a junction near the warehouse and spotted Marcus a few feet ahead, speaking quietly with one of the custodians. His posture was relaxed, attentive, kind. He was listening, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but truly listening. When the conversation ended, the custodian laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and walked off. Marcus turned, saw her, and smiled. Burning the late oil again, Liv? She returned the smile. Couldn't sleep. He joined her, and they started walking down the hallway side by side. Funny, he said, I used to think people who worked at big companies were these unreachable geniuses in glass towers. Now I see they're just people trying to get through the night shift like everyone else. She glanced at him. Some of them are. Some are trying to remember what it feels like to want something more. He looked at her curiously, but said nothing. I saw your book back there, she added. You're still deep into the final project? Yeah, he nodded. It's getting there. Still working on the data models. She considered telling him she had seen the note, that she knew his name had been etched into a quiet list of private milestones. But something told her this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Instead, she said, if you could change one thing about how companies work, what would it be? He raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. Wow. Okay, probably how they value people. Not just by their title or education, but by what they can bring. Potential's invisible, until someone actually looks. She stopped walking. He turned to her, waiting. Has anyone ever looked? She asked softly. He smiled, but there was a quiet sadness beneath it. Not yet, but I'm hoping. And there was again that steady flame, the belief that even if no one saw him yet, they would. Eventually, she nodded, then gestured toward the stairwell. I'm headed up. Try not to finish all the coffee down here. No promises, he said, offering a small salute before turning the other way. As Olivia climbed the stairs, her mind wasn't on the meetings that awaited her later that morning. It wasn't on budgets or roadmaps or press statements. It was on a folded note in her pocket and a line underlined twice. It was on a name, handwritten with conviction. Marcus Reed wanted to work at Bennett Enterprises. And Olivia Bennett, for the first time in years, wanted more than anything to make sure he had that chance. 2 days after discovering Marcus's note, Olivia sat in a high-floor conference room of Bennett Enterprises, the skyline of San Jose stretching wide beyond the wall of glass behind her. Morning light filtered through automated blinds, casting thin, calculated shadows across the sleek walnut table. Around her sat 8 members of the executive leadership team, department heads, vice presidents, and directors who had long been the stewards of her vision. The meeting was halfway through when Olivia leaned forward, tapping her pen lightly on the edge of her notebook. I'd like to shift gears for a moment, she said. The room quieted. Before we move on to Q3 strategies, I want to bring up something I've been thinking about, a potential opportunity in how we identify emerging talent internally, particularly from non-traditional backgrounds, especially within the lower operational tiers. There was a pause. David Keene, Senior Vice President of Operations, raised an eyebrow. You mean like internal promotions? He asked. Yes, but broader than that, Olivia replied. We talk about innovation constantly, but we rarely look for it outside of upper management or specialist roles. I've been thinking, what if we're missing high-potential people because of where they start? What if we've trained ourselves to only look at the surface? You mean identifying talent among janitors and guards? Said Sheila Miles, head of HR, her tone polite but clearly skeptical. Olivia nodded, careful to keep her voice neutral. Yes, there may be individuals already working within our ecosystem who have more to offer than we've ever realized. David leaned back in his chair. With all due respect, Olivia, I think that sounds noble, but we have over 3,000 employees. We can't start treating every part-timer like a future executive. I'm not suggesting that, she said calmly, but maybe we could establish a framework, a talent spotlight initiative, an anonymous submission portal, something to surface stories we wouldn't otherwise hear. David gave a half shrug. People at that level are paid to do a specific job. That's their contribution. We don't hire guards to think about finance. There was a tension in the air now, a shift Olivia had felt coming but hoped not to confront so soon. She tilted her head slightly. What if one of those guards already is thinking about finance? What if he's studying it? What if he's already building the skill set and simply hasn't been seen? David's smile was thin. Then he should apply through the regular channels like everyone else. Assuming he knows those channels exist, Olivia countered. A silence fell over the room. Olivia could feel the discomfort now, the unspoken resistance, the unwillingness to engage with the possibility that the company's current structure might be blinding them to people who mattered. She didn't mention Marcus's name. She couldn't, not yet, not without betraying the trust she was building. But the implication hung there, obvious enough for anyone paying attention. Sheila cleared her throat. We do have systems in place to track performance and potential. If someone shows promise, we usually know. I'm sure that's true for people who have visibility, Olivia said, choosing her words carefully. But I've recently seen firsthand how easy it is for effort and intelligence to be hidden in plain sight. And I don't want this company to be the kind of place where that becomes normal. David exchanged a glance with another executive across the table. If this is about a specific person, maybe it's worth considering context. Sometimes people stretch the boundaries of their role. That doesn't always mean they're ready for more. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Are you saying ambition is a liability? He paused. No, I'm saying focus matters. If someone's spending work hours doing something unrelated to their job, it's a concern. There it was, the heart of the resistance. The refusal to acknowledge potential because it didn't come in the expected packaging. Because it came at night, under fluorescent lights, with a flashlight and a borrowed textbook. I'll tell you what concerns me, Olivia said, her voice steady but firm. It's that we may be building a culture where people stop trying because they've learned it doesn't matter how hard they work. They'll never be seen. That, to me, is far more dangerous than someone reading a finance textbook during a slow hour. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Sheila offered a thin nod. We can look into starting a review of internal mobility pathways. Maybe revisit how we measure performance at lower tiers. Olivia gave a small nod. Let's do that. And I want real stories. I want names, progress, and the challenges they're facing. Let's find out who we've been missing. The meeting moved on, but the shift in mood lingered. Some of the executives grew more guarded, more careful with their words. Others watched her differently now, perhaps uncertain about where this was all going. Back in her office later that morning, Olivia stood by the window, arms folded, watching the downtown traffic below. Her reflection stared back at her faintly in the glass, composed, calculating, but weighed down with silent fury. She thought again of Marcus's note, of his line about working at Bennett Enterprises one day. She hadn't needed to hear his name spoken aloud in the meeting to know exactly who David had been referring to. Someone had noticed Marcus's behavior, the studying during breaks, the ambition, and flagged it as a problem. He hadn't been celebrated for his initiative. He had been recorded, judged, and discussed behind closed doors like a deviation from protocol. Olivia turned from the window and sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop and pulled up the internal management platform, digging through digital notes and informal complaints. There it was, a small HR entry from 2 weeks prior. Employee, Marcus Reed. Observation, non-task-related activity observed during multiple shifts, reading, note-taking. Manager note, advise to remain focused on assigned post. Monitor for continued behavior. A warning, not disciplinary, but the kind that lingered, the kind that stayed in a file, coloring someone's future long after the incident faded. Olivia closed the laptop slowly, the room thick with silence. She had spent years building this company, shaping it from a garage startup into a national powerhouse. She had believed in innovation, in creativity, in progress. But somewhere along the way, bureaucracy had calcified. Good people had been rebranded as distractions. Promise had been labeled as risk. She stood and walked across the room, her heels soft against the carpet. The city pulsed below, full of people trying, some for the first time, some for the last, to make their way forward. Marcus was one of them. And now, she wasn't just responsible for seeing him. She was responsible for ensuring the rest of her company saw him too. Over the next 2 weeks, Olivia returned to the night shift 5 more times. Each visit began the same way. The familiar gray uniform, the quiet scan of her badge at the secondary employee entrance, the subtle shift in posture that allowed her to melt into the background. No one questioned her presence anymore. Liv Monroe had become a part of the overnight routine, and Olivia used that invisibility to her advantage. She had abandoned the role of passive observer. Now she was studying, cataloging. She spoke more often with the night crew, learning their rhythms, their frustrations, their tiny victories that never made it into quarterly reports. What struck her most wasn't the exhaustion, though it was always present. It was the resilience. The humor exchange at 2 o'clock in the morning over vending machine failures. The way co-workers cover for one another without asking. The quiet pride in work done well, even when no one was watching. But her attention always returned to Marcus. They had shared several more brief conversations since the night in the break room, each one peeling back a layer she hadn't seen before. He was intelligent, yes, but more than that, he was observant. He noticed patterns in systems and people. He understood how things connected. He spoke a strategy the way seasoned analysts did, not with jargon, but with clarity. He never brought up the note she had found. She hadn't returned it yet, waiting for the right moment. Instead, she had begun a different approach. Late one night, she left a small stack of printed pages outside the security office, industry articles on financial modeling, quietly marked with highlighter in a few places. She didn't sign them, and she placed them casually between a coffee magazine and a shift schedule, as though someone had left them behind. The next night, they were gone. A few days later, she tucked the paperback beneath the break room microwave. It was an older, worn copy of The Intelligent Investor, a classic she had used during her first semester in grad school. Inside the cover, she had written only one line, "You're not invisible." No name, no explanation. By the following morning, the book had disappeared. She did again. A few pages on valuation metrics slid between inventory sheets. A free subscription card for a financial newsletter taped beneath a vending machine's change return. None of it was overt. Each act was small, quiet, deniable, but she watched the changes unfold. Marcus began to talk about his project more confidently. He made references to recent case studies she knew hadn't been part of his coursework. He dropped terms like discounted cash flow modeling and sector volatility in casual conversation, not to impress, just because he was integrating what he'd learned. And then, one night, Olivia saw something different. She was refilling a stockroom when she passed by the far end of the East Wing corridor. The lights were dimmed, and the only sound was a hum of distant HVAC units. Marcus was there, speaking with a younger warehouse tech, a new hire barely out of high school. The kid looked frustrated, a shipping report clutched in one hand. Marcus wasn't just listening. He was guiding. "Don't stress the interface," he was saying. "It's clunky, but the logic is consistent. Think of it like an if-then chain. If you process the scan before checking quantity, the system flags a discrepancy." The kid nodded, still frowning. "Here," Marcus said, stepping closer. "Let me walk you through it." They disappeared into the inventory portal room, the tension between them replaced by purpose. Olivia stood there a moment longer, watching the closed door. Marcus wasn't just absorbing information anymore. He was sharing it, teaching, leading. Back in her office the next day, Olivia pulled up the internal promotion and mentorship data. She filtered by department, then by shift, then by level. The numbers confirmed what she had suspected. Less than 4% of night shift workers had ever applied for internal mobility. Of those, only 1% had been interviewed. Fewer had been promoted. The system wasn't just blind. It was sealed. She picked up her phone and called Joanna. "Can you do something for me?" she asked. "Pull all current and past applications for internal roles that were rejected in the last 18 months. Filter by night shift employees only." There was a pause. "That's a lot of data. Any particular reason?" "I'm looking for a pattern," Olivia said, "and maybe a few missed chances." While she waited for the report, she began drafting something else, a framework for what she called the Ground Floor Initiative. It would be a pilot program, anonymous at first, designed to surface overlooked skills and ambitions within the company's lower tiers. Participants could submit work samples, goals, and informal project ideas without formal resumes or departmental endorsements. Everything would be reviewed blind. No names, no titles, no biases. It wasn't about charity. It was about sight. That night, she returned again, not in uniform, but as herself. She arrived just after 3 o'clock in the morning, long after most had settled into their routines. Marcus was at his desk, finishing a sweep of digital logs. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face. "Olivia," he said, clearly caught off guard. She smiled. "Didn't expect to see me like this, did you?" He stood quickly. "No, not really. I didn't know you worked nights." "I don't," she said. "Not usually." He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly, understanding beginning to dawn. "Wait, I'm Olivia Bennett," she said gently. "Founder and CEO. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he laughed, but it wasn't nervous. It was full of disbelief. Of course you are." "I wasn't trying to trick anyone," she said. "I just needed to see the company from the ground up again, without filters." He looked down, then up at her again. "And what did you see?" "I saw someone who shouldn't be behind a desk with a flashlight," she said. "I saw someone we failed to notice." He blinked, stunned. "You mean me?" "Yes," she said. "And I want to fix that. Not just for you. For everyone like you." There was a long silence, full of things neither of them could yet articulate. Then he asked, voice quiet, "Why me?" She reached into her coat and pulled out the folded note. "Because of this," she said, placing it on the desk between them. "And because you never stopped trying." Marcus stared at the paper, then back at her. "I have an idea," she continued. "It's not public yet, but I want you to be part of it." "What kind of idea?" "The kind that changes how we define potential," she said. "The kind that opens doors." He sat down slowly, overwhelmed but not afraid. And Olivia knew, for the first time since she had walked those halls in disguise, that this wasn't just a redemption story for one man. It was the planting of something far greater, something ready to grow. 3 nights after Olivia revealed her true identity to Marcus, the familiar corridors of Bennett Enterprises felt altered in her eyes, not because the walls had changed, but because now every detail seemed sharper, every crack in the foundation louder. Her conversation with Marcus had ignited something permanent, a clarity that refused to fade. She returned to her regular schedule during the day, but part of her attention remained rooted in the shadows of the night shift. Each morning, she waited for updates from Joanna and the HR team on the ground floor initiative, which was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. She had requested the pilot list be curated by an independent panel she trusted, with no names, just ideas and evidence of potential. Marcus's submission, when it came, was stronger than she had anticipated. His mock budget breakdowns and strategic frameworks revealed a mind already operating at a professional level. She had plans to meet with him again. In fact, she had cleared her evening calendar for Thursday, expecting to see him during his usual break window around 2 o'clock in the morning. But that meeting never happened. When Olivia arrived that night, again dressed as Liv Monroe, she was met with an unfamiliar guard at the main security checkpoint. A temporary badge, new face, stiff posture. No sign of Marcus. She hesitated. "Hey, is Marcus around?" The new guard glanced up. "Marcus Reed? He doesn't work here anymore." The words dropped like ice down her spine. "I'm sorry, what?" "Yeah, he was let go earlier this week. Monday night, I think. Supervisor said it was a violation of conduct. Something about not staying alert during his shift." Olivia didn't respond. She turned quickly, walking toward the elevator with tight, silent steps, heart pounding against her chest like a warning bell. Back in her office, just past 4 o'clock in the morning, she yanked open her laptop and began combing through the internal employee change logs. It didn't take long to find the termination entry. Employee, Marcus Reed. Reason for dismissal: failure to comply with post-monitoring protocols. Incident observed and documented by shift supervisor. Reviewed by security lead. Approved for immediate dismissal. No formal warning. No prior citations. Just a single incident report, logged and processed without escalation. She called Joanna. Her assistant answered on the second ring, groggy but alert. "I need full documentation on Marcus Reed's termination. All internal notes, who filed them, timestamps, everything." There was no protest. Joanna knew that tone in Olivia's voice. "I'll have it to you within the hour." Olivia sat back, stunned. She had just spoken with Marcus. She had just started something. And now he was gone. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the full report was in her hands. She scrolled through the digital file with growing disbelief. The complaint had been initiated by a senior night supervisor, someone Olivia didn't recognize directly, but who reported to the same operations division that had subtly dismissed her proposal 2 weeks prior. The infraction in question? Marcus had allegedly failed to respond to a routine door alarm within 30 seconds, later explaining that he was completing a log update at the time. No damage, no actual breach, just a procedural slip, one that most guards might have received a note or verbal correction for. But Marcus was different. He had been watched, monitored. His studying, once a symbol of discipline to Olivia, had become a weapon used against him by people who saw initiative as defiance. She closed the file and pressed her fingers to her temple. Beneath the layers of protocol and authority, she could feel it. Retaliation. Subtle, deniable, but unmistakably rooted in discomfort with the idea of someone stepping out of their designated place. She opened her internal messenger and sent a short directive to HR. Suspend the processing of Marcus Reed's final paperwork immediately. Do not issue his termination confirmation or finalize payroll exit. I will be reviewing this case personally. She added her digital signature and hit send. Then she made a second call, this time to legal. By noon, she had summoned a closed-door meeting with the internal compliance officer, the VP of Security Operations, and Sheila from HR. The room was quiet, the blinds drawn. Her voice was clear. I've reviewed the termination of Marcus Reed. It's been reversed, effective immediately. Sheila frowned. Olivia, I understand this is personal to you, but our department followed the correct steps. No. Olivia cut in, her tone measured but sharp. What happened was a targeted response to someone demonstrating ambition, someone who should have been mentored, not punished. The compliance officer cleared his throat. If this becomes a precedent, we open ourselves to accountability, she interrupted again. We should open ourselves to that. The VP of Security looked unsettled. He was observed studying during active shifts. We have video. It's not about ambition. It's about attention to duty. Then why wasn't he given a standard warning? Olivia asked, her gaze fixed. Why was he let go within 24 hours without review by HR or secondary assessment? No one answered. She leaned forward. We failed him, she said. And if we continue to treat curiosity as rebellion, we're going to lose more than just one man. We're going to lose the culture we promised we were building. The silence that followed was long and strained, but none of them argued. She dismissed the group and immediately called Joanna again. Find out where Marcus is working now. I need to talk to him. It took nearly a full day. By the following afternoon, Joanna had tracked him down, a warehouse distribution center across town, part-time. She handed Olivia the address. It's not much, she said, but it's something. Olivia didn't hesitate. She canceled her next meeting, grabbed her coat, and drove. The warehouse was loud and chaotic, the kind of place that smelled of cardboard, concrete, and fatigue. She spotted him near the loading dock, clipboard in hand, his uniform a size too large, his movements automatic. When he turned and saw her, his expression froze. She approached him slowly. Marcus. He looked at her, unsure whether to be surprised, relieved, or frustrated. What are you doing here? I just found out, she said quietly. I didn't know they fired you. Not until last night. He said nothing. It wasn't right, she continued, and I've reversed it. He stared at her, jaw tight. It's too late. No, it isn't. They didn't just fire me, he said. They erased me, like I didn't matter. You do matter, she said. That's why I'm here. He folded his arms. Why now? Because I made a mistake, she said. I should have moved faster. I should have protected you. And I didn't. There was a pause. Then his voice softened. I thought I was doing everything right. You were, she said, and now I want to give you the chance you've earned. She extended a sealed envelope. Inside is an offer, a full scholarship, mentorship, and a paid internship in our finance division. Not out of charity, out of recognition. He took it slowly, not opening it yet. Olivia met his eyes. I can't change what happened, but I can promise you this is just the beginning. He looked down at the envelope, then back at her. For the first time in days, hope flickered again in his expression, and Olivia knew The blow they had dealt him might have been crushing, but it wouldn't be the end. The warehouse air was thick with heat and noise, but Marcus barely felt it as he stood there holding the envelope Olivia had handed him. He hadn't opened it yet. He couldn't, not until the fog of disbelief passed. Her presence here, her words, her acknowledgement of everything that had happened, had cracked something open in him that he'd spent years building walls around. Olivia didn't stay long after delivering the offer. She gave him space, said she'd be waiting when he was ready, and left him standing by the dock with a hum of forklifts in the distance and his heart pounding in his chest. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table of his shared apartment, the envelope before him still sealed. By morning, the seal was broken, and the contents had changed everything. The scholarship offer was official, signed by the CFO and Olivia herself. Full tuition covered at the university where he'd been struggling to afford night classes, plus a monthly stipend to ease the burden of his living expenses. But what mattered most wasn't the money. It was a letter that accompanied the documents, handwritten in blue ink on plain stationery. It read, "You were seen. You were never the problem. Our culture was, help me fix it." He folded the letter and tucked it away in the pocket of his worn backpack. That afternoon, he called the distribution center and resigned. 2 days later, he stood once again at the entrance of Bennett Enterprises. Not in a uniform, but in his best button-down shirt and the same dark jeans he had worn to his last college presentation. It felt strange walking through those doors in daylight. The security guard on duty didn't recognize him. A quiet irony. Joanna met him in the lobby, professional but warm. She escorted him to a temporary workspace on the 3rd floor, where his internship would begin. He wouldn't be handling high-level projects at first, mostly assisting analysts, compiling reports, running research checks. But for Marcus, it felt like stepping through a new kind of threshold. Later that morning, Olivia stopped by unannounced. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Welcome to the bright side," she said. He smiled, stood quickly. "Thank you for everything." "I didn't do this for you," she replied. "You did this for yourself. I just got out of the way." He appreciated her directness. He nodded, then gestured toward the spreadsheet on his screen. "I've already spotted 3 redundancies in this report. Do I flag those somewhere or just cry silently into the data?" She laughed, not the restrained chuckle of a CEO in a meeting, but something real. "You flagged them," she said. "Then we fix them." The internship days passed quickly. Marcus threw himself into the work with a focus sharpened by years of doing more with less. He asked questions, stayed late, and built quiet connections with analysts who had once walked past him without a glance. The shift wasn't instant, but it was steady. By the end of the 2nd week, his insights were no longer being reviewed as a courtesy. They were being requested. Meanwhile, Olivia had been sorting through the aftermath of the fallout. The internal review of Marcus's dismissal revealed troubling gaps in oversight and a pattern of dismissive behavior from several mid-level managers. She acted swiftly, restructuring the night operations leadership and implementing an accountability policy for retaliation against employees pursuing development. But there was one last thread she couldn't let go of. Before Marcus had been escorted out by security, his locker had been cleared. The standard procedure dictated that personal items be boxed and stored for 30 days before disposal or pickup. Olivia had ordered those items held back. She wanted to make sure nothing important was lost in the shuffle. A few evenings after Marcus's return, she made her way down to the storage room herself. Inside a small cardboard box labeled him Reed, she found expected items: an extra pair of socks, a half-used notebook, a cracked phone charger. But at the bottom, wrapped in a plain canvas case, was a flash drive, no label, no markings. She hesitated, then slipped it into her coat pocket and returned to her office. She inserted the drive into her laptop. A folder appeared. Final project, personal archive. She clicked it open and found a single document and a spreadsheet. The document was a complete financial strategy analysis, structured, deeply researched, and written with the kind of clarity only someone who lived and breathed the numbers could produce. Marcus hadn't just been studying theories. He'd been practicing real-world applications. The spreadsheet contained a mock budget proposal and a multi-year growth projection for a fictional tech firm, based on industry patterns remarkably close to Bennett's own structure. His model was bold, yes, but not naive. He had identified inefficiencies in logistics, proposed restructuring of mid-tier supply contracts, and outlined a phased strategy for reinvestment into internal talent, including a line item for non-traditional recruitment and development. Olivia sat back in her chair, stunned. This wasn't just good. It was better than some of the internal proposals she had seen from paid consultants. He had built this on his own during the margins of his life, without support, without resources, without even knowing if anyone would ever read it. She called Joanna immediately, sent a calendar invite to the strategy division heads. I want a presentation scheduled by next Friday. Include Marcus. Marcus. Yes, Olivia said. He has something to show them. The meeting was scheduled without fanfare. Marcus was told only that he'd be presenting a financial exercise, nothing more. He didn't question it. He prepared quietly, polished the visual layout as model, practiced his timing. That Friday morning, he stepped into a boardroom filled with men and women who had once never looked past his badge. But now, he didn't wear one. He carried only a flash drive and the weight of all the nights that had brought him to this moment. Olivia sat at the far end of the table, arms folded, eyes calm. When Marcus spoke, the room listened. He didn't pitch. He shared. He walked them through the model, explained his methodology, defended his numbers. He didn't stumble once. He didn't apologize for being there. He didn't ask for permission. When the presentation ended, there was a silence. Then the head of strategy spoke. Where did you learn this? Marcus looked at Olivia, then back at the room. While working the night shift, there were no further questions. After the meeting, Olivia caught up to him in the hallway. They saw it, she said. He didn't need her to say more, because now they all had. And nothing, not even the darkest hallways or the highest towers, could erase that truth. The days that followed Marcus's presentation buzzed with quiet energy across the upper floors of Bennett Enterprises. Though no public announcement had been made, word of the meeting circulated quickly through the strategic leadership circles. A few department heads scheduled follow-ups with Olivia. Others requested access to the presentation deck. None of them asked how a newly placed intern had landed in a room typically reserved for directors and vice presidents. They didn't have to. They had seen the quality. The origin was secondary now. But for Olivia, something about that silence disturbed her. Marcus had delivered more than just a performance. He had exposed a fundamental flaw in their system, the invisibility of potential. And yet, aside from polite curiosity and a few forward-thinking executives showing interest, the broader company culture remained unmoved. She knew why. The real story hadn't been told yet. That was about to change. The quarterly town hall was approaching. A signature event streamed across all departments, with live attendance from hundreds of employees and thousands more watching virtually. The agenda was a usual mix of updates, financial performance, employee recognition, and strategy overviews. Olivia had a standard CEO address prepared, carefully curated, reviewed by communications, polished to professional perfection. She threw it out 3 nights before the event. Instead, she sat alone in her office, lights low, a notepad in her lap. She wrote from memory, from instinct, from the raw, unfiltered experience of everything she had seen since the night she first walked the halls in disguise. On the day of the town hall, she stood backstage behind the curtain, the hum of music and corporate visuals playing over the massive screen on stage. When her name was called, she stepped out into the light with no teleprompter, no slides, no pre-approved script. The applause was polite, then faded into silence. She looked at the sea of faces in front of her, employees from every division, interns, analysts, managers, engineers, and custodians. The cameras at the back of the room streamed the moment live to offices in New York, Seattle, Austin, and remote workers across the country. Good morning, she began. Today, I'm not here to talk about quarterly performance. A quiet murmur passed through the crowd. I'm here to talk about something much harder to measure, something we rarely see on spreadsheets or dashboards, and something I've been thinking about every day for the past several weeks. unseen potential. She paused, let the words settle. You see, a few months ago, I started hearing whispers about morale issues among our night shift employees. Small things, declining retention, unanswered feedback. I didn't ignore those concerns, but I didn't act fast enough either. Until one night, I decided to show up. She walked slowly across the stage. Not as myself, as someone new. I put on a uniform, took a different badge, and spent the night walking the halls of my own company as a stranger. Now the room was silent in a different way, no longer polite, but leaning in. What I saw changed me. She described her nights on the floor, the people who worked tirelessly without recognition, the conversations in break rooms at 2 a.m, the forgotten excellence, the resilience. She didn't mention Marcus by name. Not yet, but she painted the picture clearly. I saw someone studying alone at night with a flashlight. Someone who wasn't just surviving the shift. He was building a future. Quietly, relentlessly. He wasn't on anyone's radar. He had no mentorship, no clear path upward. But he had vision, and he had the kind of discipline we spend years trying to teach. She stepped to the edge of the stage. That man was let go by a system that mistook curiosity for insubordination. And when I found out, I realized we had built something efficient, but not necessarily good. There was no applause, just stillness. And I know this story isn't unique. I know there are more of you out there. Employees who've been overlooked, underestimated, boxed in by job titles that say nothing about who you are. Now her voice grew stronger. So today, I'm announcing the launch of the Ground Floor Initiative. It's designed to identify, mentor, and elevate talent from across the company, not based on titles, but on potential. Anonymous, inclusive, open to all shifts, all departments. No referrals required. No degrees necessary. A ripple of whispers spread to the room. I've already seen what happens when we do this right. I've seen it up close. And I promise you, this isn't a temporary program or a PR campaign. This is a recalibration. Now, for the first time, she allowed herself a smile. I also want to know that the person I saw studying with that flashlight, he's here, not in uniform, not in the background, but right here in our finance division. Not because someone gave him a handout, but because he refused to be invisible. Her eyes moved toward the side of the stage, where Marcus now stood behind the curtain, unsure of whether to step forward. She gave him the signal. He walked onto the stage slowly, quietly, dressed in a blazer and slacks, eyes scanning a room full of people who had never known his name. There was a beat of silence. Then the applause began. It started with one section, then another, and another, until the room erupted, not out of pity, out of recognition. When the noise subsided, Olivia leaned into the microphone one last time. This company was built on technology, she said, but it will be sustained by people, not just the ones who sit at the top, but the ones who hold it up from the ground floor. She stepped back, and the screen behind her faded to black. Marcus stood beside her, stunned, still adjusting to reality of what had just happened. She looked at him, a quiet pride in her expression. "You weren't invisible," she said softly. "Not anymore." The days following the town hall were unlike anything Marcus had experienced before. For the first time in his life, people looked at him differently. Not with pity, not with confusion, but with curiosity and respect. Colleagues who had passed him in the hallway without acknowledgement were now offering handshakes and stopping him for questions. Emails trickled into his inbox from departments he hadn't even known existed. Data science, product strategy, market intelligence. Some asked for feedback. Others requested collaboration. A few simply wrote, "Thank you for what you shared. It mattered." He hadn't shared much. Not yet, but the story Olivia had told on stage had reached everyone. And even without his name mentioned at first, it hadn't taken long for people to connect the dots. There were whispers, yes, but they weren't malicious. They were stunned, curious, reflective. Marcus took it all in quietly, never seeking attention, but no longer shrinking from it either. He showed up to work early, stayed late when needed, and met every new challenge with the same quiet determination that had defined him in the shadows. His internship contract had been updated immediately after the town hall, extended, formalized, and converted into a structured development track that aligned with Bennett's new ground floor initiative. But more than that, he now had direct mentorship. Once a week, Olivia met with him personally, not just as a CEO checking in, but as someone genuinely invested in his growth. Their meetings weren't formal. They took place in overlooked corners of the building, in unused lounges, small conference rooms, or occasionally during a walk around the outdoor terrace on the executive floor. One Wednesday morning, just after sunrise, Olivia met Marcus by the east side balcony that overlooked the city. The breeze was soft, tinged with that faint marine air that sometimes drifted in from the coast. "You know," she said, sipping from a ceramic mug, "when I was in grad school, I once submitted a case study on a company's budgeting model and accidentally proved their entire growth plan was unrealistic." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Accidentally?" "I was just trying to practice for a finance exam," she said. But it caught the attention of one of the professors, and suddenly I was in a room with analysts who thought I was a prodigy. "Were you?" She smirked. "I was just paying attention. Kind of like you." He looked down at the city. "It's strange. A month ago, I was getting written up for studying during my shift. Now I'm being asked to contribute to budget forecasts for $1 billion company." She turned toward him, serious now. "Don't mistake this moment as luck. This isn't luck. This is what happens when someone with talent finally gets air to breathe." He nodded slowly, but his expression remained guarded. She caught it. "You're not sure yet." "I'm trying to believe it's real," he admitted. "But part of me still expects it to vanish, like it's borrowed time." "It's not borrowed," Olivia said firmly. "It's earned." He nodded, grateful but still adjusting. She respected that. Trust took time. In the following weeks, Marcus was given a project of his own, a small internal audit of one of the company's underperforming departments, a test of his analytical approach and his ability to work cross-functionally. He threw himself into it, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he finally had the chance to do what he loved with full access to tools, data, and resources that had once been locked away behind titles and seniority. But the most striking transformation didn't happen in meetings or spreadsheets. It happened in the way he walked. Marcus no longer kept his head low. He moved through the building with the quiet confidence of someone who knew where he belonged. He spoke up in meetings, shared ideas without hesitation, and challenged assumptions when the data pointed somewhere new. During one cross-department session, a senior analyst questioned projection Marcus had built into a model. "These margin assumptions are aggressive," the analyst said. "I'm not sure leadership will be comfortable with the risk tolerance." Marcus didn't back down. "If we're optimizing for safety, you're right. But if we're optimizing for growth in Q4, the model holds. I can walk you through the assumptions again if you'd like." The room went silent for a moment. Then the senior analyst nodded. "Please do." It wasn't dominance. It was clarity. He knew what he was talking about. And more importantly, he knew how to speak with conviction, not ego. Olivia received word of the exchange later that day through her executive assistant. He held his ground. Joanna said with a smile, "Didn't flinch." "He wouldn't," Olivia replied. "He's been flinching his whole life. Now he gets to stand." Beyond the workplace, changes were happening too. Marcus moved out of his shared apartment into a small studio closer to the Bennett campus. With the scholarship in place, he reduced his course load to focus more deeply on select subjects: corporate valuation, financial ethics, and strategic leadership. For the first time, he was studying not out of desperation, but with direction. One evening, Olivia stopped by the campus library where he was reviewing material for his finance ethics seminar. "You busy?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked up, just preparing to be grilled by a professor who thinks corporate morality is a contradiction. She chuckled. He's not wrong. They sat in silence for a moment before she reached into her bag and handed him a slim envelope. "What's this?" "An invitation." He opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter on Bennett Enterprises letterhead. It read, "Dear Marcus Reed, we would be honored to have you join our finance department as a full-time junior analyst, beginning next quarter." Your performance, insight, and leadership have already made a significant impact. This offer represents our belief not just in your talent, but in your future. With respect, Olivia Bennett. Marcus didn't speak at first. His hands tightened slightly around the letter, the weight of it heavier than any acceptance he'd ever held. "You mean it," he said. "Finally, I wouldn't put it in writing if I didn't." He looked up at her, his voice low. "Thank you." Olivia shook her head. "Don't thank me. Just keep showing us what we miss." And in that moment, surrounded by silent stacks of books in the soft glow of library lights, the distance between where Marcus had come from and where he was going collapsed into something tangible. Not a dream, not a wish, but a second chance, earned real and entirely his. By the beginning of the next quarter, Marcus had transitioned fully into his new role as junior analyst in Bennett Enterprises' finance department. His days were now structured around meetings, reports, data reviews, and collaborative sessions with teams that had once been unreachable. The environment, though fast-paced and exacting, energized him. He finally felt as though his work had weight, and that weight, for the first time, was matched by recognition. But beyond his own journey, a wider movement had begun to take shape, one rooted in Olivia's vision and shaped, in part, by Marcus's story. The Ground Floor Initiative, which had been quietly introduced during the town hall, was no longer just a concept. Over the weeks that followed, it evolved into a structured framework supported by cross-functional teams from HR, talent development, and strategy. Olivia made it clear from the outset, this wouldn't be another program to check boxes. It would be an engine for internal discovery, a long-term commitment to finding and nurturing talent buried beneath outdated hierarchies and expectations. The first phase involved outreach, quiet, deliberate, and strategic. Anonymous forms were distributed across departments, inviting employees to submit ideas, personal projects, or skill portfolios. No resume or endorsement required. Submissions would be reviewed blindly by rotating panels composed of managers and senior staff from outside the applicants' departments. Each panel was instructed to evaluate based on merit, originality, and potential impact. Marcus, by Olivia's invitation, was one of those panelists. It was both surreal and deeply grounding for him. Just months ago, he had been filing shift reports and sneaking in study time. Now he was reading proposals from overnight warehouse clerks, part-time call center agents, and custodial staff who reminded him of his former self. One submission caught his attention: a detailed plan for optimizing internal delivery routes between Bennett's regional hubs, written by a logistics team member in Chicago. The plan was technically sound, clearly articulated, and based on first-hand observations. It wasn't polished like something from a seasoned analyst, but the logic was undeniable. Marcus flagged it and added notes: high viability, strong practical knowledge, strategic insight. The candidate was brought in for a mentorship track within the supply chain strategy division 2 weeks later. He reviewed more proposals: a bilingual customer service representative with a knack for UX improvements, a maintenance technician who had been teaching himself coding and had designed a prototype app for internal requests, a single mother from the document scanning department who had built a financial literacy workshop for her local community. Each time Marcus read a submission like that, he felt the old anger stir, not at the employees, but at the years of silence and dismissal that had kept their work buried. But that anger no longer had nowhere to go. Now it was fueling change. Olivia, meanwhile, had shifted the tone of the company's executive strategy meetings. At the most recent quarterly review, she challenged each division leader to identify at least one internal contributor from a non-traditional background to bring forward for development. "If you can't find anyone," she said, "you're not looking hard enough." There was pushback, of course, quiet resistance couched in professionalism. But the message was unmistakable. The bridge between upper management and the rest of the organization was no longer theoretical. It was being built, piece by piece. And it wasn't just symbolic. By the end of that month, the company had approved the creation of a new department, the Talent Discovery Office, with Marcus as one of its founding members. Though he would continue in his finance role, a portion of his time would be dedicated to identifying hidden talent, supporting mentorship frameworks, and developing metrics for long-term success. He shared the news with Olivia in her office during one of their Friday check-ins. I don't even know what to call myself anymore, he said, half laughing. Analyst? Advisor? Liaison? Call yourself what you are, Olivia said. A builder. She looked at him for a moment, then added, this initiative was always going to need someone who's lived both sides of the story. You bring credibility it can't function without. He took a deep breath. I just don't want it to be about me. It won't be, she said, but it started with you and that matters. That weekend, Olivia invited Marcus to a private roundtable with a group of emerging voices across the company, employees who have been identified to the first wave of the initiative. The meeting took place in a small, informal setting at one of Bennett's satellite campuses. No suits, no slides, no titles, just voices. A software support rep from Arizona shared how she had written procedural documentation for the tools her team used, only to have them discarded because they weren't official. A facilities worker in Boston spoke about the language barriers he had faced and how he'd started creating bilingual cheat sheets for others. A night shift inventory lead from Austin talked about how he redesigned his warehouse's tracking system using color-coded stickers, reducing misplaced items by half. Marcus listened to every story, taking notes, nodding when others spoke. When it was his turn, he didn't talk about the town hall, or the flash drive, or the applause. He talked about walking the building at night, how the silence made you feel like you didn't exist. He talked about watching others work with brilliance and care and never being asked why they stayed or what they dreamed of. And he talked about being seen, how it changed everything. After the meeting, one of the attendees, a systems technician named Rosa, stopped him in the hallway. I don't think I could have said any of that out loud if you hadn't gone first, she said. That's the point, he replied. You're not supposed to be invisible. That same week, Olivia commissioned the first internal report on the impact of the ground floor initiative. The early numbers were small but promising. 10 internal transitions from support roles into mentorship or training tracks, 32 project submissions and evaluation, and over 200 employee profiles now flagged for further development. It wasn't a revolution. Not yet, but it was a foundation, a bridge. And Marcus, one standing on the outside looking in, was now helping others cross it. The boardroom at Bennett Enterprises headquarters had never been this full. Executives lined one side of the massive table, while senior department heads, financial officers, and key division leads filled the others. The quarterly board review had always been a high-stakes ritual, but this one carried a different kind of weight. For the first time in the company's history, a junior-level employee, still technically within his first full year of corporate employment, had been given the opening presentation slot. Marcus stood at the front of the room, adjusting his tie in silence as the screen behind him loaded the first slide. He didn't feel nervous. He felt ready. The room quieted as Olivia entered, her presence commanding but calm. She didn't sit at the head of the table. Instead, she took a seat halfway down the side, flanked by her chief strategy officer and the new head of the talent discovery office. She gave Marcus a single nod, subtle and steady. He turned toward the audience. Good morning. My name is Marcus Reed. I serve as junior analyst in finance and as an advisor in the ground floor initiative. Today, I'll be presenting a multi-phase capital efficiency model with long-term impact projections derived from cross-departmental assessments over the past quarter. The technical language was deliberate. He wasn't here as a symbol. He was here as a professional. He clicked to the next slide. The proposal laid out a comprehensive plan to redirect underutilized funds from administrative silos towards scalable training programs and employee-led process innovation. Marcus highlighted trends found in warehouse operation, logistics, and system support, areas often marginalized in corporate strategy discussions. He used numbers, not anecdotes, forecasts, not feelings. 20 minutes in, questions began. The CFO raised a hand. You're projecting a 10% increase in internal promotion conversions within 2 fiscal years. How are you accounting for variance in training adoption? Marcus answered immediately. By incorporating regional pilot programs, we can adjust based on department size and demographic data. Adoption rates will be tracked in monthly phases, with adjustments in real time. Another executive asked about risk. Marcus responded with mitigation strategies tied to budget flexibility and early feedback loops. By the time the final slide appeared, The room had grown quiet again, not because they were unconvinced, but because they hadn't expected this level of mastery. Marcus closed with one sentence. "We don't need to hire vision externally when we already have it in-house. We just need to see it." He stepped back. The screen faded to black. A pause hung in the air. Then slowly the CFO nodded. "Approved for stage 1. Let's begin implementation planning." No one disagreed. As the meeting moved on, Olivia watched Marcus return to his seat, calm and composed. There was no visible celebration, no outburst of emotion, just quiet understanding that something meaningful had occurred. After the session ended, she met him outside in the executive lounge, a space usually reserved for board members and high-ranking guests. The view from the glass wall spanned the entire skyline. He stood there for a moment before she joined him. "I didn't say this before the presentation," she said, "but I read every slide last night. You could have stopped after the third one. It was already better than anything we saw last year." He smiled. "I want to make sure it couldn't be ignored. You did more than that." They stood in silence for a moment, the city below them moving in slow, rhythmic patterns. "I kept the flashlight," Marcus said quietly. She turned to him, surprised. He continued, "The one I used during my night shifts. I almost threw it out when they let me go, but I didn't. I kept it in a drawer at home. I don't know why." Olivia looked back toward the horizon. "Because it reminded you who you were." He nodded. "Now it reminds me of who I became." They didn't need to say anything else. The arc had closed, not as a perfect circle, but as a full one, the kind shaped by fractures, rebuilt by persistence, and strengthened by the decision to stop being silent. Marcus stayed with Bennett Enterprises. Within the year, he was promoted to Analyst 2. A year later, he led a task force for internal development strategy, mentoring employees who had submitted their first ground floor applications. He traveled to other campuses, listened to forgotten stories, and turned his attention to others still waiting in the shadows. The ground floor initiative expanded company-wide. By its second year, over 100 employees had transitioned into new roles to the program, many from positions once considered unmovable. The retention rate improved, but more importantly, so did the culture. Supervisors began hosting open forums during night shifts. Training programs were adapted for all hours, not just a 9-to-5 crowd. Olivia instituted a new policy. No advancement discussion could take place without representation from every shift and department. And through it all, the flashlight remained, a symbol, yes, but a personal one. It sat on a shelf in Marcus's office, just behind his desk, visible only if you knew to look. Visitors sometimes asked about it. "Just something from the beginning," he would say. Olivia continued her role as CEO with a renewed sense of responsibility. The company had not just rediscovered talent. It had rediscovered its humanity. She often thought about the version of herself who had walked those halls in disguise, uncertain, angry, and distant. That woman had come searching for answers. She had found a mirror instead. And in Marcus, a reminder that vision doesn't always look like success in a tailored suit. Sometimes, it looks like a man reading under a flickering light in the middle of the night, refusing to surrender to the silence around him. In the end, it wasn't strategy that changed the company. It was visibility. And once the light was turned on, it never went out again.